We came up with a segment, call to action to you guys. Tell us your favorite story. Tell us your favorite story of all time, you as a comic book reader. You guys did not disappoint. We got the most engagement for any call to action we've ever had. So once again, favorite story, CBC. You guys tell us what your favorite stories are, and we're going to share it with you, with you, the viewers, right now. Our first entry was from Michael Methvin, and he brought in the Sinestro Corpse. He's a big fan of the Sinestro Corps, sent us it in his stories. I have to say, Chris, I'm not too familiar with this storyline. I really like what Jeff Johns has done with the Green Lanterns and all the lanterns, all the spectrums. This is something I'm going to need to check out, but I have no doubt it's a pretty solid read.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've never been really big on Green Lantern, but a few years back, I actually hit up a huge sale at a store in Sacramento, and I filled up a long box. I got the books for like under $25 each, and I filled up a long box of Jeff Johns, like Brightest Day, Blackest Night, Green Lantern stuff. So I haven't read it yet, but I've heard nothing but good stuff from so many people over the years.
Yeah, that's actually Brightest Day. I was Blackest Night, Brightest Day. That was an excellent storyline. I was totally into that, but I never got into Sinestro Corps. What Michael Methvin, thank you so much for sending it in. This next one, I took the time to read before the show. It's from Mr. Gretzky 9966. He sent in Fantastic Four Annual 3, The Wedding of Reed and Sue. I gotta say, man, like, this was insane. This was like Medlem. It was just mayhem. Every character, they stuffed every character into this thing with Jack Kirby goodness. It was outstanding. This is one of those things that kind of proves how special the Marvel Universe was. They're special now, but how special they were when they first started, because they just integrated this whole universe together early on, and it was just so cool seeing like literally almost every character, every villain, every superhero you could think of made an appearance in this issue. It was super cool. I really enjoyed it thoroughly, and I encourage all you guys to read that.
Yeah, we know Mr. Gretzky loves his old stuff, man. He's very retro, so I appreciate that. And imagine being a kid there, like three. You're 3 years basically into the Marvel age. Mm-hmm. And to have that comic book, you pay 25 cents off the rack, and you're going home and seeing such a universe unfold right in front of your eyes, man. I can't even imagine what it was like.
I mean, 25 cents, like, to us is nothing. I'm sure that was probably $3.99 to them back in the day. I don't know, but yeah, you got your money's worth with this one. It was like 24 pages of it's mayhem. If you guys have Marvel Unlimited, I'd suggest you check it out. That's where I took a look. All right, this next one is a classic that I read when I first started collecting books, like when I first started buying them. I don't know why I didn't think of this one, Chris, but Kraven's Last Hunt was sent to us by Cosmic Comic History. I mean, this thing, I went back and read a couple issues of this thing. First of all, the Mike Zeck art, outstanding. This book, though, I read when I was like 12. I don't know how I comprehended this. This thing was so dark, so deep, with so much kind of just substance and subconscious kind of approach to it. It was just super dark, super intellectual. I don't know what my thought process was reading it back then, but it brought me, like, reading it now is completely fresh perspective as an adult, and it just reminded me how much I mean, the art was what drew me in back in the day. Mike Zeck was just outstanding, but the art still lives up. But the story's even better now that I'm a bit more mature. It kind of blew me away.
Yeah, J.M. DeMatteis on the story on that. I mean, he revolutionized the game. But you got to look at this era, where you have these writers and artists like Frank Miller as well during the 80s that really revolutionized the comic book industry. And it wasn't just one thing or another. It wasn't just the art. It wasn't just the writing. It was really bringing on these teams that made it work. And when you talk about Mike Zeck, the way that he paneled that storyline, not only with his art, the gritty art itself, but just the paneling was so fresh for that time. And I again, just go back. If you don't have the books, you have Marvel Unlimited, go buy the digital copy for $2. Look at it was visual, it was the storytelling, it was the visuals, it was all of it and how it was captured, man. It was just that. I think during the mid 80s when those things were happening, or like Batman Year One, and there's countless others too, it really, because for me, I went back and read a lot, like especially the Spider-Mans. I went back and read them all over a couple year span as an adult. And because I was reading so much at once, I could see the change evolve, when you got into that time period. I'm like, wow, this is, it was groundbreaking. Absolutely. And
from like Watchmen on, it just became a more mature game, but like,
right.
Just reading the same character with different voices and just the way it was plotted out it's just brilliant. And I got to finish that run reading it now at my age right now. And I again, thank you so much, Cosmic Comic History, for sending that one in. That one really it brought back a lot for me. All right, next up, M. Lazick with Age of Apocalypse. I gotta admit, M. Lazick, this is during the time I kind of stopped collecting for a little while. It was, I do believe, mid to late 90s. So I'm not as familiar with this title as most are. I do know a lot of people are looking back on it very fondly, and it's those issues are doing pretty well in the secondary market. I know you got a few 9.8s there of this series. So I got, this is one I definitely have to go back and read, Chris.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is the time period where just the industry was hurting. It was in a very dark place, and I think, with Marvel, X-Men was one of those books that kind of still seemed to pump out some decent work. And I think what helped that probably was going into the new millennium. We had X-Men hitting the big screen, so people just it was X-Men mania. It was almost like Batman in '89. When in 2000. When we saw the X-Men on screen, people just kept diving into X-Men. And we know that Age of Apocalypse, this run, and including some of the early Apocalypse storylines, from X Factor and whatnot, were influenced the Apocalypse film that came out 6 years ago now. These are books that are from this era that were kind of a shining light among the darkness.
Yeah, that late 90s was a pretty dark time, to the point where Marvel almost went bankrupt. But thankful to all of us, that didn't happen. So anyways, M. Lazick, thank you so much for sending that one in. Great choice. This next one, everybody should be familiar with. There was no way you could avoid it. We had FXW Loves Comics send in The Death of Superman. I mean, this was everywhere. You could not miss this. The media frenzy for this particular storyline was bonkers. At this point in the early 90s, characters mostly stayed dead. So the fact that Superman was the death of Superman, it kind of hit a lot of people like, oh my gosh, nobody's safe. This is obviously one of the top 3 comic book characters of all time. And for him to die in this storyline blew everybody away. That being said, a lot of people bought this issue thinking that they put their kids through college. I mean, there were over 1 million copies produced, so you could probably find these for pretty cheap. But again, really classic. It's now a classic storyline with Doomsday and all that. But this is a good one. FXW Loves Comics. Thank you for sending that in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I got my copy, in the black bag with the red blood drip logo. I bought it. I saved up my allowance. I remember the store owner of my local comic book shop saved a copy for me until I had the $10 to buy it. And it's still worth about $10 in the bag. So the irony of the value of this book, but I hear you, man. Such a infamous storyline that will never be forgotten. regardless of the value of the books. And I think when you talk about this character dying, at least for me and my friends, you know, we thought he was dead. We thought he was dead, and we weren't. I don't think we had any thought that he was coming back. But it's comic books. We know what usually happens. So
yeah. You know, I'm trying to put myself back in that. We talked about this earlier. I'm trying to put myself back in that time, and like I honestly didn't. I can't remember. I want to think that I thought he would be coming back because, like, I mean, come on, Superman can't be dead. Like, there's no way. So I'm pretty sure I believed that, but you know, again, it didn't happen all the time. It didn't happen as much as it does now, and then more people just come back. Where at this point, you can't even trust. Comic book deaths back then were always an impactful moment, and this one even more so because it was Superman. Absolutely. So, speaking of one of the most popular comic book characters of all time, we have another Spider-Man story sent in by Anthony AM412. This one is a classic. I didn't read it before this show, or I didn't read it before Anthony submitted this, but I did read it before the show. It's Amazing Spider-Man number 33. It was outstanding. It was so good for many reasons for me, but it just kind of brings, you know, it just focuses on the core of who Spider-Man is, and thus the perfect little soul that he is, and the fight that he will give for anybody, you know. And it just right here you see, you know, he fought Dr. Octopus. Sorry if I'm giving away spoilers. This issue's probably 50 years old though.
Right.
He fought Dr. Octopus.
50-year-old spoiler.
He fought Dr. Octopus in the previous issue. The base crumbled on top of Spider-Man underwater. The water's about to come rushing in. He needs to get the serum to save Aunt May. He's got this rubble. He cannot get off him. But he thinks of how he failed Uncle Ben. He's not going to fail Aunt May. It's just an amazing. It's amazingly written and even more so drawn by Steve Ditko. Just the struggle he has to get out of here. And what's amazing about this is how Spider-Man Homecoming took from this. Y'all may remember when the Vulture blew up his little base there, and Spider-Man had to push his way out. Come on, Spidey. Come on, Spidey. Come on, Spidey. He had to motivate himself. Kind of similar thing happens in Amazing Spider-Man 33. I encourage all you guys, if you have Marvel Ultimate,
Unlimited.
I've had it for so long. I can't even say. If you have it, I encourage you all just to read this issue. It is truly outstanding.
Yeah, I agree. I love how they called that back in Homecoming. One really interesting thing with this, and I'm an advocate for Tom Holland's. I made videos on my channel saying that Tom Holland is the most comic book accurate Spider-Man and Peter Parker portrayal out of the three, and I've explained why with facts, not just opinions. But my son was talking to me the other day, and I this about him. He's only 14 years old, and he's read all these classic Spider-Man issues too. And he says, you know, the one thing that I didn't like was that he didn't have that enthusiasm of fighting for Uncle Ben. And I am an advocate for the fact that we didn't need to see Uncle Ben again in terms of that whole, you know, him getting murdered and the whole origin story of Spider-Man. We saw it twice already over the last few years before we saw Tom Holland Spider-Man come into the MCU. But it's tough when you know that a really pivotal moment like this, and how that incident with Uncle Ben and him feeling responsible, and how that scarred him and really gave him that whole with great power comes great responsibility. We know it's there in the MCU. They brought it up in Homecoming where, you know, Peter's telling Ned, like, oh, with everything Aunt May's just been through, I can't right now. It's just, but it's just not even really there, though, in terms of its meaning. And I hope that moving forward, that we get a little bit more of that. I know Tony Stark has been, you know, a big role model, but I want to know that Uncle Ben was there, because in this storyline, that was his strength. You know, that really showed his strength, and I want to see more of that in the films. Absolutely.
I think we will see that in the films. But you're right. It was just, we saw it too many times, and I'm really glad the way they introduced Spider-Man into the MCU. But speaking of Spider-Man, it's now time for Chris and myself to share with you guys our favorite stories. So, Chris, here we go.
Well, I know you're probably going to bring up some images, but I'll just bring up the books themselves. How about that? Does that work?
Of course you are.
All
Let's go
right.
full screen on this.
Okay, we got. It's kind of a glare. It's in the baggie. My Amazing Spider-Man 121 CGC. It's a 5.0, but I love this book. And then we got Amazing Spider-Man 122, and this is the infamous Death of Gwen Stacy storyline. Jerry Conway, one of my favorite writers of all time. John Romita Sr., my favorite artist of all time. And just these two books, guys, probably two of my top 5 books in my collection. You know, that storyline to me, talk about people staying dead. And I know that we've had an influx of clones and you know, multiverse world Gwens. But it never compares to the fact that Gwen Stacy died and she stayed dead. This storyline, in the way Jerry Conway wrote Spider-Man back in those days, it had the you know, the banter and you know, the fun 1960s, 1970s style. We get that, but he added such depth and layer to the character that was Peter Parker. And the way that this storyline transpired and panned out, it's epic. And we were just talking about storylines like Craven's Last Hunt or Frank Miller's Year One in the 80s. But really, you know, this storyline was, to me, ahead of its time. And it really sticks with me. Like I said, the one thing that I've always related to with Spider-Man is that even in those days, way back then, and I think this was, I know Jerry Conway was writing it, but it was heavily influenced by Stan Lee himself. He wanted to make these characters human beings. Okay, we saw that. We were just talking about that with Uncle Ben and how that affected him. And here's the next thing that truly affected this character for years and decades to come, and that's the death of somebody that he loved, Gwen Stacy. It's like iconic, and I just it will always be probably my favorite storyline of all time.
Yeah, I saw actually. There's on YouTube. We should probably put in the link below, but a kind of short documentary on this story and how it went down, and it's just kind of fascinating what led up to this. And kudos. That's a huge risk for them to do back then. Like out of nowhere too. And you know, they say it in the issue. Somebody dies in this issue, like, and they have all those people on there. But for it to be Gwen Stacy, I can't imagine. Like, because I grew up already knowing this through, like, you know, maybe a flashback or something like that and the issues that I grew up with. You and I didn't read this, like, as like, holy shit. So I would love to talk to somebody who actually read this and actually got kicked in the groin. Like, oh my God, because I'm sure it kicked a ton of people in the groin. It's Absolutely. A great story. It's a great storyline that you picked there. All right. But now I'm going to move to mine, Chris. Mine's a little bit out of left field. Not many people mention this book, but this is an early 90s book written by Peter David, Dale Keown doing the art. It's Incredible Hulk 388. The reason I bring this book up is because this one actually hit me. And, you know, I was a suburban kid. I didn't really, you know, I didn't know much about the AIDS epidemic or HIV. Growing up, all that stuff. But this issue right here was a standalone issue. The story was Rick Jones flew out to meet his buddy Jim Wilson in Miami to play a gig. Rick Jones is, you know, kind of the sidekick of the Hulk. As they're driving to the gig, Jim Wilson tells Rick Jones he's HIV positive. And basically Rick Jones is like, "You have AIDS?" He's like, "Yeah." So Rick Jones is just blown away by this news. They continue on. They talk about it. Rick Jones is mad he didn't tell him before, et cetera, et cetera. They're at the benefit playing the show, and this villain on the cover you see here, Speed Freak, breaks it up. He's trying to murder somebody. Jim Wilson, or, you know, Rick Jones kind of tries to stop him. He gets his hand slashed, starts bleeding. Rick Jones. He gets all of his palms are just bleeding. Jim Wilson gets stabbed in the chest. At that moment, Rick Jones feels helpless because he cannot help his friend who's laying on the floor knowing that it's possible that he could get AIDS. The Hulk steps in to take Jim Wilson to the hospital. But Rick Jones just feels terrible that he had to hesitate and did not know what to do in that moment. That just hit me. This storyline just kind of blew me away because this has never been done in comics before. Nobody ever talked about AIDS or anything like that. And this is the first issue I remember dealing with something like that in such an impactful way. And it really it left an impression. It's one of my favorite all-time issues. Again, Marvel Unlimited, Hulk issue 388. If you haven't already checked it out, give that a read because, again, it left an impression on me.
Yeah, I mean, talk about, addressing society and how these artists and writers dealt with this through comic books. And how about this one too, 420? With the
That's right. It's the death of Jim Wilson. I forgot to mention that. He dies 40 issues later, 32 issues later. So yeah, and that's written by Peter David too, who really again took risks. A lot of these people we're mentioning, a lot of these issues we're mentioning, people are taking risks. Like Kraven the Hunter. I mean that you're dealing with there were some mental issues he was dealing with, Kraven, that they didn't address right off the bat. But I mean, he's manic in there. He's showing, he's crying, and then all of a sudden he's super happy. So the death of Gwen Stacy, again, taking a risk. This AIDS issue in the Hulk, taking a risk. So those are ones. Social issues are really the ones that I feel like make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always question. It's like I wonder what it would be like if there was social media during all those times, and just I think I really wish sometimes we as collectors, as a community, can turn off social media and take this art form for what it is, like we did in the olden days. And I think a lot of people would find themselves more grounded in just at the basic level connecting with what's going on in these books. I don't think a lot has changed. I still think that overall the industry, is trying to do the same thing. We're trying to tell stories relevant to the world that we live in and the world that exists outside our door. And if not our door, then somebody else's doors that maybe we have never, put ourselves in the shoes of. And, I think social media heightens up, kind of extreme opinions on both sides of how to look at these things. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. When people take risks to say, look, these are that we're going to talk about it, take it or leave it, but we feel this needs to be addressed. And I feel the day that comic books stop doing that is the day that comic books aren't comic books anymore. Agreed.
100%. And right there, I think we'll end our favorite comic story, CBC. This is great. You guys, maybe we'll probably run this again in the next few coming weeks because you guys did not disappoint. Again, # favorite story CBC. If you want to continue to share, we'll continue to share on the show as well.